All right, so today we're going to open up this eBay package and we're going to find out some really cool stuff that has to do with photographic history and religion. I'm going to do it in fast motion. So this is really, really neat. Now we have an antique rosary, and not only is it a rosary, but it's an early part of photographic history. And so if you look close, you might think this is bone. Now, a lot of these were made out of carved bone, but this one is celluloid. And celluloid actually has been around from the Victorian era up until about the 40s, right around the time of World War II, when plastics were not yet fully invented to the plastics we know today. And so celluloid went out of favor, of course, when after World War II, we actually bettered the invention of plastics. Now it's made out of cellulose and nitrate, nitrous something. I'm not going to get into the history of that, but how can you tell this is bone as opposed to celluloid? Now celluloid was made to emanate ivory, and made to emanate the bone, which came from like basically the tusks of elephants and other kinds of animals. And they made this actually to save the animals from becoming endangered species, which they were becoming because of the use of ivory tusks. Now, if you look really close at this, you can possibly tell it is celluloid by let's try to zoom in if we can. By the way, this is, if you see these little lines, right? Real ivory will have these lines called Schrager lines. But with celluloid, it emanates the Schrager lines. But if you look in between each line, don't know if you can see this, they are really spaced, very exact from one another. So if you look at those little lines, they're almost identically lined up with each other perfectly. There's no big gaps and differentiating gaps in between each one. So this is probably telling me this is most likely celluloid. Now I could be wrong. Let's go over here and take a look at the heart piece right here. That this is a spot where a religious metal would generally be. But the earlier rosaries would not have a religious metal and would generally have a heart. So let's go ahead and look. Let's see if we have Schrager lines of ivory. And it's very hard to show you on my camera. I don't know if you can see this. And I'm trying to look and see how they're spaced, just to get an idea. But it's very hard to show you with this camera, which does not want to focus properly. But if you look, the lines look pretty identically spaced out. So I'm going to go with, because this is very lightweight, it is most likely celluloid. I could be wrong. No expert. But if you look at each bead, look at this. We have the roses, almost like little carved roses going throughout it. Now, this was probably made sometime in I'm going to guess, the 1880s to about the 1920s. Very hard to tell which one is truly Victorian as opposed to Edwardian or early 20th century Art Deco. Now, what's really neat about this is you see this little hole here. This actually shows you a image, and I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see it through here. Let's see if we can do this. And you're supposed to hold it up to light, but we do see an image. Let's try to focus if we can. And it's not going to work because my camera does not take very good close-ups. Let's try this again if we can. But there is an image of the grotto of Our Lady of Lourdes in Burlington, Vermont. And I'm trying to show it to you. I'm going to take my camera down off the stand and see if we can actually get a better view. You see the words? Okay, I really can't show you guys the way I want to. But you have to aim it at a certain way. And then you can see the image in there, which is quite cool. I don't know if you guys are going to get to see this image of this, but it has some words. There you go. These Stanhopes were also used for espionage, which is quite cool. Now, I'm going to show you a whole video of the history of these things in a moment. So it's going to be like a 10-minute long PBS style video. Now, I'm going to post a picture of what I see through the viewfinder so you guys can see. Now, generally, older rosaries had these hearts instead of the metals, and they would be upside down. And so that's how you can generally also tell Victorian and earlier, and sometimes very, very early 20th century. This is really cool now. When I placed my eye up to the little microscope, it actually burned. There was chemicals actually burning my eyes. And that's how another way that I can tell that this is celluloid. Celluloid is a highly flammable product, early form of plastic. And let me tell you something, things used to catch on fire, especially early 20th century electrical wiring, especially the outlets that people used to plug lamps in, including the lamps used to have celluloid plugs on them and appliances. And so like around the 1910, 1900, 1920s, houses caught on fire. By the way, you're looking at the image on the right of what we see in here. Caught on fire quite a bit by the new technology of celluloid, highly flammable. They made pool cue balls out of this as well, and amongst many other things. Now, when the pool balls would bang into each other, kaboom! You could have an explosion. Now, just a little bit of heat can cause the celluloid to actually burst into flames. There was many articles that I read in the early 20th century when celluloid became the most popular, although it was earlier in the Victorian era that it was invented. Lots of people actually catching on fire. I actually read a story about a man that had a celluloid comb, and by rubbing, it through his hair so many times, he actually caught on fire and burnt to death. Well, let's go ahead and go check out that PBS style video, which is going to be 10 minutes long. So hold on to your horses.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cabinet of Curiosities on our own devices. I'm Jean Messier, and I'm back here at the Delaware Museum in Winnipeg, having a look at a Victorian-era optical curiosity. Now, a few episodes ago, I covered stereoscopes, which were a very popular form of mass entertainment in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, but those weren't the only ones. This is a nib pen containing what's known as a Stanhope viewer, and this is a little lens assembly that allows you to view a micro photograph a few millimeters square. Now, these were popular at around the same time as stereoscopes, and these types of viewers were embedded in all sorts of everyday objects. Now, the story of the Stanhope begins in 1851 with a gentleman known as John Benjamin Dancer, and he was an instrument maker from Manchester. And he was also an early pioneer of photography, and indeed he is credited with taking the earliest known photograph of Manchester in 1842. Now, professionally, he was known for crafting some of the finest microscopes in the British Isles, and in the 1850s he started to combine his love of microscopes and his love of photography to create some of the world's first microphotographs. Now, this was something that really wasn't possible in earlier years due to the limitations of photographic technology. So the two most common photographic processes at the time, the daguerreotype and the calotype, really didn't lend themselves well to reproduction or to enlargement or miniaturization. However, in 1851, a gentleman known as Frederick Archer invented the wet collodion process, which did lend itself to miniaturization. And so in that same year, John Dancer used a microscope and the wet collodion process to produce microphotographs. And the feat that really brought him to public attention was accomplished in 1854 when he reduced a 680-word plaque that had been erected in the memory of inventor William Sturgeon, the creator of the first electromagnet, down to around 2 millimeters in diameter. And Dancer produced thousands of these microphotographs and exhibited them all across the British Isles and Europe, and became very well known for this new technology and art form. He was also responsible for a bunch of other innovations. For example, he patented one of the first purpose-built stereo cameras to produce stereographs, and to learn more about that, please check out my video on stereoscopes. And he also was the first to introduce limelight to the magic lantern, producing the world's first modern large format projector. So in 1857, Dancer first exhibited his microphotographs in Paris, where they came to the attention of a French inventor named René Dagron. And Dagron saw great commercial potential in microphotography, but unfortunately these photographs needed a microscope to view, which were not only very large and bulky, but also very expensive to manufacture. So he started looking around for a more economical and compact way to magnify these images. And he found it in the form of something called the Stanhope lens. And this was invented by the 3rd Earl of Stanhope in the late 18th century and consisted of a biconvex lens that could magnify images up to 300 times. Now, although these suffered from distortions, chromatic aberration, and other issues, they were significantly cheaper to produce than conventional microscopes, and thus were widely used by scientists and doctors. And what Dagron did was to modify the Stanhope lens by cutting off one end and extending it to produce a cylindrical plano-convex lens. And the planar section was placed at the focal plane of the lens, and this is where he pasted the microphotograph using an adhesive called Canadian balsam. And because the photograph was right at the focal plane, it was always in focus. And this produced a very easy to manufacture and very compact viewing device with high magnification that could be embedded in all sorts of ordinary objects. So Dagron patented this system in 1860, and in 1862 he exhibited his so-called Stanhope viewers at the London International Fair. He received an honorable mention, and his Stanhopes came to the attention of none other than Queen Victoria herself. And Dagron would later present the Queen with a series of Stanhope viewers containing microphotographs of the royal family. And just as with stereoscopes and other technologies that came to the attention of the royal family, this attention caused sales of Stanhopes to increase. And in that same year, 1862, Dagron opened a factory in Gex, France, which at its peak employed 150 craftsmen and was putting out 12,000 Stanhope viewers every single day. Now, Stanhopes, by virtue of their compactness and ease of manufacture, could be inserted into pretty much every type of object you could imagine. They were put into pendants, into rings, into needle cases, into pens like this one. There was a luthier by the name of Jean-Baptiste Vuillaume who put them into his violin bows, and they would contain microphotographs of famous violinists and luthiers such as Paganini and Stradivarius. One of the most common types of Stanhope viewers were these little tourist tchotchkes, usually little cast pewter monuments. And for example, you could go to Washington, D.C., and you could get a little pewter model of the Capitol building that, when you looked into it, showed you views of the city. Or if you went to Paris, you could get a little model Eiffel Tower that had views of that city. This is an extremely popular little trinket. And interestingly enough, and probably unsurprisingly, one of the most popular uses for Stanhopes was for displaying pornography. So in the 1850s, the French government instituted a crackdown on pornographic material. And so when Stanhopes came into fashion a decade later, manufacturers wasted no time inserting all sorts of titillating images into them. And these were a lot more compact and discreet to carry around on your person and view in private. So just like the internet was for porn, well, Stanhopes were for porn as well, just like a lot of other technologies. Now, while Stanhope viewers were mainly a curiosity, microphotography did play an important role in the fields of warfare and espionage. So during the 1870-1871 Franco-Prussian War, Paris found itself under siege, and so it was very difficult to get information in and out of the city. So one way that they got around this was using balloons, and to learn more about that, please check out my video on the balloon hydrogen gas detector. And they also used pigeons, which of course have been used for centuries to carry messages all the way up through the Second World War. The problem was that a pigeon can't carry all that much weight, so you're severely limited in the amount of information you can send on a single flight. Thankfully, however, René Dagron's microphotography process handily solved this problem by allowing him to shrink entire pages of text down to a microphotograph of about 6 by 11 millimeters. And each of these weighed about 0.02 grams, meaning that your average pigeon could carry around 20 of them. So this greatly increased the amount of information that could get in and out of the city. And it was a quite successful postal system. So moving on into the 20th century, microphotography was widely used by intelligence agencies all around the world in the form of microdots, microphotographs that are reduced down to the size of the period or a tittle on a page of text, and usually pasted in the place of a period or tittle or hidden in some other innocuous object. And this allows you to smuggle out a great amount of information and get it past enemy inspectors and sensors and the like. And this form of hiding information, not by encoding it, but by physically concealing it, is known as steganography. So it did have its practical uses despite being mostly a popular curiosity. So just like stereoscopes, Stanhope viewers started to fade in popularity in the early 20th century due to competition from more advanced forms of entertainment. However, they continued to be made in smaller numbers. And indeed, the factory that René Dagron set up in 1862 in Gex only closed down in 1972, having produced Stanhope viewers continuously for 110 years. And you'll still find Stanhopes being manufactured today, either reproductions of Victorian era models for collectors or things like religious trinkets, say a little pewter cross pendant that contains a Stanhope containing a page of scripture or a prayer. So a very old technology, but one that, while not as popular as it was in its heyday, is still around to this day. So let's actually have a closer look at this particular example. As I said, this is a nib pen. This was manufactured around the 1890s in Ireland and is beautifully carved from what is known as bog oak, which is oak that has fallen into a peat bog and been preserved and turned into this very dense ebony-like material by the action of the tannins and other acids in the bog. And the Stanhope is located in the handle just in the front right here. And the way you use this is you hold this up in front of your eye, and at a certain distance, you start being able to see the image. You can pan it up and down and side to side in order to see the complete micro photograph. And then here is an actual enlargement of the photograph, and you can see that this is a tourist Stanhope that shows you different views of Dublin. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and a huge shout out to Mark Trainer and Inez Bonacosa here at the Delnavert Museum for inviting me back to produce this video and introducing me to Stanhopes. I had actually never heard of these devices until they told me about them, and this was a really fun one to learn about and research and present to you. So I'll see you next time on another episode of Cabinet of Curiosities, where hopefully I will be back here at the museum looking at more Victorian era tech. Until then, I'm Gilles Messier from Our Own Devices. Have a great day.
Okay, so now you know about Stanhopes. I think that guy explained every single thing there is to know about it way better and more articulate than me in 10 minutes. Hope you weren't bored. Give him a thumbs up. I'll put a link to his video in my description. Stanhopes, you can find them in all sorts of objects. If you collect, you don't have to just collect religious objects. Most of these were tourist pieces. Most of these were novelties. They were for fun. We did learn they were used for pornography. They were also used during war and for espionage and getting messages across enemy lines. Really cool. This one is very old. This one, again, between 1880s and about, I'm going to say, this particular one about 1910. Now, I did research on this particular grotto in Burlington, Vermont, Our Lady of Lourdes, and it was built in 1859. So we have some clues that this is very old. I did tell you that the altar piece or the metal, after the potter beads here, after the crucifix, generally the earlier and older rosaries would have had a heart-shaped piece right there, the main piece starting with your decades of the rosary patterns going up. And so this has a heart telling me it's old. It is not a more contemporary crucifix and rosary. This is actually really quite cool. Most likely celluloid. We have roses carved in here. Let's try to focus if my camera will. My camera does not like to focus. There we go. Very intricate, very pretty. Most of these were made out of bone, and a lot of these were made out of celluloid. Celluloid was a cheaper version, of course, of ivory, more able to be mass produced for tourism and touristy pieces. And what is something like this worth? Well, these are highly sought after amongst rosary collectors, and these generally sell in the $150 to $185 to $200 price range. The bone ones are worth more. The celluloid, don't mind me, ones are worth a little less because, of course, people want the ivory, which is banned, but antique ivory is not banned. But this is quite beautiful. What did I pay for it? $25. Got really lucky. The person did not know this was a Stanhope. And you can find these in all sorts of things on your searches on eBay. You might likely actually come across an object that is antique and the seller does not know it's a Stanhope. Look for these little circles that look like a little teeny tiny piece of glass on all sorts of objects such as pens, needle cases, and all sorts of Victorian doodads. And you may get lucky enough to get a Stanhope just for the crucifix without the rest of the rosary. I see these broken off quite a bit a lot of times because it was made with thin wire. These alone, just for the Stanhope crucifix, generally sell in the $45 to $85 price range. Now, a lot of the images are long gone. They disintegrate because it was placed on a piece of celluloid, I gather. The images actually across the ages and decades, the lighting, actually UV light rays, if you leave this near a window, actually fade out the image. And I'd say about 50 to 70% of the original images in these old Stanhopes are gone. And so to find it fully intact where you can see an image is really quite the thing. And there's loads of different images you will see in these, and it's glowing. Look at that. Thanks for watching. See you guys all soon. If you found this video interesting, please give me a comment. Help me with my algorithm to grow my channel. Comments help me grow my channel, and thumbs up do as well. All right, see you guys soon on the next unboxing of more really cool objects that I find on eBay.